Ruple and Evelyn by Laurence Beveridge. Chapter 1. Clouds of Divinity. The year 1609. The wind could not have been bolder on that night of nights. It howled in the hollows and pounded at the palace walls, as if anxious to halt the events that transpired within. The city was tense with expectation. Peasants anxiously fashioning their meagre wares as aristocrats dined on others' misery. Nobody, rich or poor, knew what the future held. The possibilities were endless. But with a clap of thunder and the barking of ghoulish hounds, royalty was gifted by divinity. It was in a large chamber on a bed of silk and fur that Queen Augustine of Grand London gave birth to triplets. Her heart had faltered when the midwife declared that the third child might die. It simply did not seem strong enough, and its heart was beating much too fast. As the nurses hurried around, Augustine cradled the triplets in her arms, 3 live little beings with thick black hair and identical bright green eyes, so new to the world, so innocent to life's complications. "Which one was first?" asked a bold voice from behind her, a hint of fear in its delivery. "This one." Augustine pointed out the far left child, whose eyes were already flicking around the room inquisitively. "He will be Rex, then." The man speaking stood forward, out of the shadows, his face wet with tears and his jaw set. His title was Rex Ruple, King of Grand London and England, R.R. to his friends, and as he was racked with paranoia of the most sinister breed. "Will you promise not to murder our children, Augustine?" he said, his hand aching to touch his wife's shoulder and thank her for bringing these beautiful pink gremlins into the world. "I am not your grandmother, R.R. How many times, husband? What could make you think I would do such a thing?" "I have been lost recently, my love. Too many tales and yarns." "I promise I will not harm our children. Please, will you come and sit with us?" As she returned her attention to the children, a flash of lightning illuminated the chamber. The gargoyles through the window cast in grisly shadows on the walls. The king knelt and leaned into Augustine. "Which one should we name Ruple?" "This one on the end. He was last to come out, and the nurses believe he might die." A midwife hurried into the chamber with a goblet of elderflower cordial, wet a sponge in the mixture and dabbed it on the child's lips. The thunderclap from the lightning reverberated throughout the palace. "He won't die, Augustine. He has his brothers with him, Rex, and, I know, he should be named after your mother's grandfather, Romero." The baby Romero started to move, his pudgy little fingers reaching for Ruple and trying to pull the blanket over Ruple's bare little pot belly. The king smiled for the first time in months and helped Romero with the blanket. "Yes, Romero. He will be the soldier." Out in the passageway, the sound of boots against stone echoed in the chamber. "The cardinal to collect his dues," said R.R., standing up and turning to the doorway, where a tall, strangely withered young man had entered. "Seth Septus, I assume you have come to gather your damned bounty." "My king, you flatter me," said Septus, his voice drooling and high-pitched. "I simply came to see how these tiny, brilliant creatures of God's creation were performing. No, nothing sinister, my friend. We have time to talk about our accounts at a later date. Now it's time to bless the children." "I will not have my children blessed by him!" shouted Augustine. "I think I'll be inclined to agree with my queen, Seth. Don't take this to heart, but your work is done. Tell the Almighty I thank him for preventing my wife's infidelity and for protecting the triplets." The cardinal, though shocked by the rebuffing of his efforts, smiled arrogantly as Rex gave thanks and turned to leave the chamber. "Wait there!" roared R.R., his jaw suddenly shuddering with anger. He took a step forward and glowered at the cardinal. "So you'd leave now, would you? And you'd thank the Lord for me? How would you do that? Do you have some enchanted link to the Almighty? You know, in truth, I have a strange inkling that you never spoke to the Lord about this Septus. In truth, I've started to believe that Augustine would never have harmed children, and that you, a man I trusted, used my paranoia to play me like a fool." R.R. stormed across the room and grabbed Septus by the throat. "You will have your cursed money, Septus, and you may erect all the holy houses you wish, but you will keep out of my affairs, and with God as my spectator, I declare I will cut you down if you as much as think about making contact with my children. Is that my all-loving cardinal understood?" "Completely, my lord," coughed Septus, as R.R. withdrew his hand. Was there any need for the display of theatrics? R.R. rushed forward and raised his fist to the cardinal's stooped form. "Don't!" R.R. turned to see his wife, her tiny body drenched in sweat, and her arms desperately clinging on to the triplets. "Do not strike him. You have made your point. Let the wretched fiend go." The cardinal spat some phlegm out and glared at Augustine, his posture hunched and his beetle-like eyes burning. "Thank you, my ever so estimable queen," Septus gurgled as he grasped the nearest pillar to help himself up. "Leave here," said R.R., as his guards stepped warily towards the cardinal, their swords drawn. "I'm leaving. There's no need for your goons, my lord." The cardinal straightened his robes and left the chamber coughing and retching, R.R.'s guards following closely behind. Rex turned to Augustine and released a deep breath. "I must return to Macabre and converse with Bane. This is a dark hour in our history. Let us pray the children bring us light." Augustine glared at her husband. "Do not fear, my darling. I will return soon." "You cannot leave, R.R. What will happen to Ruple?" R.R.'s eyes took on a faraway appearance, and he walked to the window and looked out over his city. When he spoke, his voice was soft, barely audible over the wind outside. "He has his brothers to protect him. He has other guardians also." "He needs his father, or will you also make the mistakes of your ancestors?" "A week only. Within a week you will see my return, I promise you that." Augustine smiled sadly as R.R. left the chamber, thanking the nurses and speaking in a hushed tone to his manservant. She wanted to say goodbye, but couldn't find the strength. Another crash of thunder shook the palace as her husband passed out of view, and Augustine looked down at the three beings that one day would change the world forever. And so, it was in these circumstances that the Ruple of this tale came into the world. Among thunderstorms, paranoia and confrontations, somehow Ruple's first impressions of the earth were not that it was a place of fear, but a place of love. When he'd looked into his mother's eyes, he'd seen no malice or hate. All he had seen was a young woman irretrievably infatuated with the three beings she had just brought into the world.